Hello everybody! Happy Tuesday to everyone. I am excited to jump on live today because I have a guest. I have a CEO of a staffing company who specializes in staffing travel nurses. And it is so nice to get a chance to talk to CEOs and leaders of staffing companies to hear it from them. Because one of the things that Nomadicare promotes is the concept of a win-win in the industry, and saying that we can have integrity as we work, both of us, as travelers and as recruiters and companies, and we can work together for this win-win. Hey, Mark. And that's what we're really going for. And then the only way to really get to that win-win is to have transparent conversations with each other as travelers, as company owners, as recruiters, to really understand how this works and what is fair and what is not, so no one is asking too much. So I'm going to bring Mark on with me. And we are going to talk today about overtime rates and extra time rates. Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I've got my fancy headphones in, so I'm...
Yeah, and I like the fancy smancy, what are they called, jerseys behind you. You got a cool backdrop.
Oh, yeah. I'm
yeah.
kind of a hockey
Is
guy.
That your collection? Yeah?
It is. It's pretty
Who's
expensive.
your team?
Do I say that on here, or am I going to lose half your audience?
I don't know. I'm not a sports person, so you won't lose me. But
I'm born and raised in Michigan, so I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan. But I love NHL. I love hockey. My son's a goaltender, so he's 14, and we live, breathe, and eat hockey in my house. So it's just what it is.
Awesome. Okay, go hockey. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So I just want to first thank you for joining me live, for taking the time to talk to travelers and recruiters on here as we work together, right, to help this industry just get to know each other more, know what's fair, what's not fair to ask for, because ultimately that's going to be what Butterfly affects out and makes this industry great, is us talking, like having these conversations, not it being so secret. So I'm so grateful for a CEO. We can hear it from a company leader, what it's really like behind the scenes and what we can and shouldn't ask for overtime. So to get started, I'm just going to get us on the same page first, and then I'm going to let Mark take over and tell us some perspective from him. But I just want to get us on the same page about a few definitions. One thing I want to make sure we all know is the definition of a bill rate. So a bill rate is when we work as travelers and we go into a hospital. For every hour that we actually go to work, a company like Meridian, like Mark, could charge the hospital for every hour we work. For every hour we do not work, they cannot charge the hospital. The number that they're able to charge that hospital or home health facility or whatever it is, that number per hour is what they consider the bill rate. That's what they're using to work off of to pretty much pay for everything, including to run the company there, to pay us, overheads, taxes, everything comes from that one bill rate. For those that follow me for a long time, you know I usually use the analogy of coffee. That's the big coffee pot. We each get our own cups of coffee from it. So the bill rate's that. Now we get a cup of coffee, that's our pay rate. And that's great. That pay rate is typically divided into two different sections if we're true travelers. True travelers means we have a tax home, another conversation for another topic, but hopefully you're still with me. True tax home, we can divide that pay up between non-taxable part, that's helping us cover our meals and incidentals, our housing because we're duplicating expenses, and also this portion that is taxable. And then many of you guys out there, especially nurses or radiology or ultrasound techs, you guys get these cool opportunities of overtime, way more than me as a therapist traveler does. You get two different opportunities, actually. There's a concept called extra time. There's a concept called overtime. Those are not the same. Extra time is going to be because if you guys sign a contract that is 36 hours, if you work over 36 hours, you could hit overtime once you hit 40 hours. That's like a state mandated number. They say after 40 hours, companies have to pay you more. But what happens between that 36 and that 40 hours? That is something to think about when you're looking at your contracts, because you want to know what you'll get paid. We're trying to set expectations clearly before you go into a job. That's one thing on a contract you need to see. How much you'll be paid for extra time, which is hours 36 to 40 before you click over to overtime. And then overtime is anything you work over 40 hours a week. Or in California, they even have it different, where it's also the hours you work over 8 hours in a day, which also impacts our nurses that work 12-hour shifts. So these are the concepts we're talking about today, because there's different ways that companies get to decide how they're going to pay overtime and extra time. And there's factors that go into it. Some companies you'll see choose to pay that based on the part of our pay that's taxable, and they'll only give us 1.5 of that taxable pay, because it's what states say they have to do at a minimum, which actually means, guys, we're making a pay decrease during those hours if we accept that. Some will do double time, which actually still usually means we're making a pay decrease, but not quite as much. Some will give us exactly the blended rate. When the blended rate is when you're adding up taxable and non-taxable together. Some will give us the blended rate plus $5. Every company has to make this decision for themselves. We are not here to say these companies are terrible or good. We're not here to bash anyone. We're here to help educate things to consider when you're looking at these things and what's going on behind the scenes at a company during overtime to help you figure out what's best for you when you're negotiating. So I just wanted to get us on a baseline same page of these concepts. But Mark, I would love to hear from you your thoughts on, let's say I'm a travel nurse, I have a 36-hour contract, I pick up an extra shift, so I get these 4 hours of extra time. I also get overtime rates. How in the world should I be paid for that?
Well, you should be paid well to start with. And the bottom line is that what you just said is absolutely 100% correct. You know, there are companies that will do it different ways. I think the most important thing is to understand what your agency is going to do for you. Communication in travel nursing is key, and what you and I both know is that a lot of times these contracts that these nurses sign and travel nurses sign don't talk about what happens after 36. They base everything on a 36-hour work week. So you hit the nail on the head. It's, again, not to beat up other companies or to tell us how great we are. It's understand and ask those kinds of questions. What am I going to get paid on that 37th hour? And then certainly, what am I going to get paid on anything I work over 40 hours? Because I believe you should be paid on, like you talked about, that blended rate. You should be getting both of those figures for anything over 36, and you should be getting time and a half of those figures for anything over 40, period.
Okay, so I'm just going to confirm what you said. So for hours 36 to 40, you feel like we should be getting the blended rate. Is that right? The same
Correct.
number we were making before. Yep. Now, does that switch over to all taxable at this point?
It shouldn't, because, again, you're getting, and again, we had this conversation, a taxable amount is going to fluctuate the more that you work. So in other words, the tax-free amount is not based upon salary. It should never be based upon income. It should be based upon the cost of living index in that particular county. And the GSA website tells exactly what that is. So if you work more hours, you're going to have a higher taxable income, which means you're going to pay more taxes. Welcome to the United States of America. That's the way it's supposed to be. But your tax-free portion should stay consistent and the same. So the more you work, the more tax you're going to pay, the higher income level is. The less you work, the less you're going to pay, the less income you're going to have.
Okay, and I want to just help everyone understand this too. So for those hours, 36 to 40, you guys are able to bill the hospital or the facility the same exact amount of money that you were for the hours of 1 to 36. Is that right?
Correct. There's no difference.
Correct. Okay.
Up until overtime. Obviously, you mentioned California. Whole different conversation for another day because they have a daily overtime.
Okay.
But let's just talk about the other, 49 states. Yes, for that 37th through 40th hour, we have the exact same bill rate. There's no differentiation on our contract with the facility. It's the same amount of money. So, explain to me how a travel nurse shouldn't be making the exact same amount of money too, if that's what we've all agreed upon.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to know. This is for the win-win, and you guys travelers out there, which part of my mission is for you guys to feel that empowerment of what to ask for and to know when it's not too much also, because we're not trying to bully the recruiters out of a job either, or companies. But it's good for you to know these companies are making the same amount, and there is this logical thought there of, well, why should I make less for these hours if you're making the exact same amount? And I say this knowing there are tax implications and there are legal stuff going on, but there also are ways for companies to do this legally. So that's something a company should figure out. And I think it's quite unfair if a company is trying to use that to their advantage when they can and disadvantage on us when they can. The real win-win is to find that middle ground where if you're making that much and thriving and profiting, fine. We should also still make the same amount. Now, things might switch for overtime rates. And so for overtime is 40 hours and over, we'll just say. We'll ignore California for now, which is the 8 hours and over daily rate as well. But for any state, it's 4 hours or 40 hours or over. Now, you guys as a company, are you still making the same bill rate for 40 plus, or how does that work?
You know, it varies. There are a few contracts where we don't make anything else. Again, sometimes that's okay as long as we all know about it going into it, because our expenses, housing, insurance, travel to get there, whatever we've incorporated to decide what that pay rate's going to be, we've already covered all that. And usually, if we're smart, like most of us are, we're going to do it based upon that 36-hour work week. So if it's over 40, those expenses don't exist. The only expense we'll have that's different is going to be payroll and then payroll taxes. So again, you should have time and a half of that blended rate. Yeah, we're going to have a bigger payroll expense. We're going to pay higher tax on those. But we don't have any other costs. All those costs have already been incorporated and already been, I guess, compensated for in the normal 36 to 40-hour work week. So we're good.
Yeah. And you listed some of them, but I'll just have you kind of list maybe a few examples again. What are some of those costs that you guys already covered in hours 1 to 36 that now are awash or at zero? Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, again, the biggest one is there's a housing. Either we're going to be providing housing for you, which a lot of agencies do, or some of those agencies don't provide housing, but they'll oftentimes give you a tax-free housing stipend in lieu of that housing. So that's the biggest one, because that's the one where the most, dollars are available to you. So that's already been calculated in. We certainly do. When we're looking at how much can we pay a nurse, we're going to look at how much is that house going to cost either us or him or her. So that's the big one. There's obviously insurance benefits. I mean, most companies will have, obviously there'll be a contribution from a nurse, but most companies will also have a contribution of some kind as the employer for you. So there's that benefit. There's usually either a travel reimbursement or some sort of calculation to get to and from an assignment. So those are other ones. And again, some agencies also, we don't, but some agencies will incorporate credentialing expenses. They'll actually put commission for recruiters into there. We don't, but know that there's a lot of things that a company can decide to plug into that piece of pie to figure out what their pay rate's going to be. And again, not to make any judgment, but that's their call. What you want to do is be able to see, you're asking the absolute right questions. I want travel nurses to start looking at what happens to my pay for anything above and beyond the expected. And those are two levels. One is that 36th to that 40th hour, and then after that 40, you've got to start looking at this contract. What do I see is going to happen to my pay, and ask questions about, so you're on the same page with your company, so there's no surprises. You can't be surprised in this industry on pay. There's a lot of other surprises that all happen to us while we're out there on the road, but not pay.
Amen. I completely agree with that. We travelers, we get plenty of surprises along this uncertain journey, and I agree that pay and being surprised on our paycheck when we work in overtime. And suddenly, gosh, if it dropped to 1.5 of our taxable, that would be a sad surprise, right? So I do agree that there's no reason for these expectations to not be clearly talked about and in the open.
Asking questions is one thing, but make sure it's in writing. I mean, in other words, there's a lot of great people in the industry. There's a lot of people that aren't so great and not so swift, and your audience needs to understand that. But don't take a recruiter's word for it. Sometimes he or she doesn't even know the answer. If it's not in your contract and you have a specific demand or something you want to see, have them put it in there. It's a simple addition. If they're going to say, and the recruiter's going to tell you one thing, make sure you can see it in writing, that here is exactly what that 37th hour and here's exactly what that 41st hour looks like. There's nothing wrong with having those questions. I would do it if I was negotiating to go be a CEO of your company. Are you hiring?
CEO? You want to take my job?
No.
You're going to replace me?
No way. You work too hard.
Yeah, I completely agree. That I would be a huge red flag if a company promised me something verbally and wouldn't put it in writing or would have that conversation verbally. I also really appreciate that you said sometimes the recruiters don't know. And that's something I see a lot of is I interview recruiters as part of what we do at Nomadicare to help match with these recruiters that are running their desk for the win-win. And what I find is mostly the intention is good. And it comes to poor training or poor education or something. And these recruiters come into all these different companies and get all kinds of different orientations. And they could have the best intentions and really not understand That so part of being an empowered traveler is actually helping the recruiters in a kind way understand why we're asking these questions, so they're thinking deeper. I think what hurts is when we become quite defensive at each other. And if I came to a company that was paying the 1.5, and if I brought them that energy of like, you are totally taking advantage of me, how unfair, hang up the phone and feel like that was an intentional disservice, we're not helping this industry grow. But as travelers, we get to talk to recruiters every day, which is cool. And we can ask these questions. We can, I have written a blog about overtime. Like, you guys can send these recruiters a blog about that and be like, this is how the math breaks down. Can you help me understand like why you guys wouldn't pay this? And you're going to make such a huge amount of extra coffee when I'm working like these long weeks. Right. And like you said, thank you. And like you said too, like it's such a win-win for us to work overtime, because you guys are done paying your overhead expenses and you're done paying your recruiter's salary and all these things.
Everybody wins. The hospital has more patients. The nurse makes more money. The agency makes more money.
It's such a win-win.
It should encourage overtime, because everyone wins. There's no reason not to. I can understand why a lot of travelers don't want to. If you're only making time and a half of $15, I get it.
Then it's not worth it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is confusing to me why companies wouldn't be fine paying a fair overtime, because they're just going to make more profit and not really do much more work at all for those hours,
And going back to your comment about the recruiters, just to kind of touch on that again, again, I wouldn't beat up a lot of recruiters. A lot of recruiters aren't given the information. And sometimes it's absolutely intentional. There are the Mark Holloways and some other companies that do not give their recruiters the information. Sometimes they don't even know what their bill rate they're working off of. It's here's what you offer this nurse, and they just trust. And they're also sometimes they don't have the knowledge. So it's not always the recruiter you're talking to. They might have the greatest intentions, but with our company, if you talk to one of our recruiters, they should be able to tell you exactly what I'm telling you. It shouldn't be any difference. Because I believe in that. And I think that's what's changing the industry.
And I think that is nice, and I hope we see more companies like the way you're running yours, where it's more across the board versus giving these recruiters so much. I mean, not power, like I love the recruiters, but so much freedom that's almost unfair, because it's hurting companies' brands too, to be like, this one recruiter will pay you blended rate. This one pays 1.5. And I hope, like, you are an example in this industry, a great example of this in this industry. And I commend you and love it that you're making this company-wide integrity versus a recruiter choosing if they'll have integrity. And then on the flip side, though, there are companies that have company-wide expectations of 1.5 overtime, and a recruiter can't do anything about it. So I definitely don't advocate for us doing anything that is defensive. I think us as travelers coming to these recruiters, showing them what we know so they can bring it to their management, and the conversations can become more and more. And then, like not trying as much as we can, as much as the job market lets us, supporting the companies that are playing for the win-win, because the biggest way that we vote for what stays in this industry is who we work for, more than anything else. And so I think the more we can support companies like yours or other companies that are just like, why don't we just play for the win-win and do this teamwork thing and not
really
play
works.
This like
it works great when everyone's happy and everyone's
confusing.
on the same page.
Yeah.
Well, and it kind of answers your question. I know I didn't quite finish it. When you were asking me about overtime, there are sometimes when we do get like $8 more than the all-inclusive, regular bill rate. Sometimes 10.
Oh yeah.
I have maybe 1 or 2 contracts in one state that do time and a half. It's really rare. I mean, that used to be the industry standard 15 years ago, and then hospitals kind of got smart and said, wait a minute, all your expenses are already covered. Why are we paying time and a half of all this when all you're paying is payroll and payroll taxes? So that extra $8 to $10 that we typically get really does help incorporate the taxable portion of that, so that we're not losing money. But a nurse shouldn't lose money either. We're not losing money. The nurse works 60 hours a week, and we're paying them time and a half of that blended rate you mentioned. We're not losing money. We're not making more of a margin, if that makes sense to you, than we are in the first 40 hours. And that's the way it should be. The hospital's not getting dinged for a huge pay rate, so they're not going to want to encourage overtime. The nurse gets to work overtime. The hospital's going to be billed a reasonable amount for that overtime, and we're going to make the same amount, basically, of the same margin, just more of it. I mean, we want more hours. That means we're all making more money. It's pretty transparent.
Yeah, I agree with that. Great. And just so you guys followed the first part of that, because sometimes I think it gets confusing because we don't have the great whiteboards that we're writing on today. Right. What he's talking about is he gets the same, not the taxable part, the same bill rate, which is all of it combined. In some hospitals, few of them will pay 1.5 of that whole entire bill rate. not many. Some might pay $10 more an hour, so they're getting a little bit more. Some might pay $8 more, 7. Some might pay the exact same. So he's talking about the big number that we're all sharing is the number he's talking about the hospitals pay. And so that's why even if we can just say, let's say at the very least they're making the exact same, but they're essentially making more, right, because they have nothing to pay except these payroll taxes, is why we should at least make the blended rate. And hopefully, you know, companies will even pay us more. But, you know, at the very least, I want to see us making the blended rate and not getting, gosh, a pay drop when we're working extra overtime.
I have no way to work overtime if you weren't getting it. I mean, I wouldn't work it.
Brutal. You know? Yeah, brutal. So, yeah, so that's the topic of the day. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us in your busy day and taking time out. Great to have you live. And if any of you guys that are on here, I can't see who's on here actually. Usually I can see names pop up. I can only see that there's people on here, but unless you comment, I actually can't see who you are today. But anyway, if you have a question, you can plop it in the comments and we'll answer it writing later since we don't see them live right now. But thanks for joining us, everyone. Keep recruiting empowered, traveling empowered, and yeah, thanks for joining us. All right, bye.